Before we begin, thank you very much to Faceless Robot Man for joining the Patreon campaign. Very appreciated. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you everyone for the support. If you missed it, the exclusive cut of my toy trip is now available to my $10 and up patrons, and I hope to be providing more exclusive videos like that in the future to my higher tiers. You saw a particular toy during my Metrocon haul that I'm thinking about reviewing for my for my patrons only. It's very rare that I do review only for patron, but given the context of the toy, I think it's necessary. So that's gonna be a thing. So keep an eye out, and you know I still want to do more for my patrons because you guys make sure that I can still do this, and I appreciate you all for letting me continue to be silly on the internet for you. We're going to be talking today about longevity. We're going to be talking today about how Transformers has managed to survive as long as it has, because we're getting ready for the 40th anniversary, which is kind of a big deal. It's kind of a huge thing that a toy line, which is now a full-blown media franchise, lasts this long. So we're going to take a look at it. We're going to take a look at it here. But first, let's go back to the past. Let's go and actually take in some history to this toy line, shall we? So, Generation 1. All right, 1984 happens. The Transformer toy line hits a little bit after the GoBots toy line. So it's not the first on the block, but it is the one that actually wins out in the day. It's the one that people remember and is now like $1 billion franchise. And GoBots is just that weird little knockoffy thing that actually came first, but people don't look at it that way because it failed. So, okay. 1984, Transformers were kind of revolutionary. In Japan, they had transforming robot toys for a while at that point, and Transformers, what we know as Transformers, is kind of an evolution of that. But over in America and Europe, where they had never seen things like this before, where, you know, at most cars might plug together to form a robot, again, taken from Japanese toy lines, this was super cool. This was so revolutionary at the time. You got a toy car and a toy robot at the same time. Perfect. Kids loved it. Took the toy world by storm. And to this day, there's plenty of competitors, there's plenty of other toy lines out there that try to get in on transforming robot aesthetics as a result. Congratulations, Transformers. You are popular enough to have competitors who want to basically just do the same thing you're doing. That's always a good sign. And this continues on for a while. However, then we hit 1988. So let's see where we were in 1988. The toy line is going through a run of just masters. So keep in mind, in 1988, you saw the release of Target Masters, Headmasters, Power Masters. I believe this is where you start working in Pretenders as well. I think Action Masters and Micromasters were around the corner at that point. Point being, they were at a time of basically throwing things at a wall and waiting to see what actually worked. 1988, if you look at TF Wiki and the list of toys that were actually available that year, it's a hodgepodge of all different types of gimmicks and sizes, and they really weren't sure what they were doing at that point. It was really just, let's just try everything at once and see what's popular. And unfortunately, nothing really stuck. Keep in mind that at that time, the cartoon had been off the air for a year. There had been no fictional support outside of the Marvel Comics, which weren't really the biggest movers. They never exactly got the same attention as Spider-Man and all the other big Marvel ones because it was a licensed book. So they didn't really focus on it the way they did the stuff that they actually produced in-house, because in-house stuff is always going to be more profitable in the end. So obviously that's not going to work for Transformers. So the comic books kind of kept the franchise alive, but it was basically on life support in 1988. You know what else happened in 1988? Ninja Turtles dropped. So the cartoon starts in 1987, but the toys debut in summer of 1988, and every other boys' toy line in the world was doomed. There had been nothing like Ninja Turtles. It was the perfect toy line, the perfect aesthetic at the perfect time. Nothing since, nothing before, nothing since has been lightning in a bottle the way Ninja Turtles was. Okay, so you have this weirdo toy line that is selling out like crazy. It's one of the few times that like an action figure toy line is impossible to find on a shelf because every kid wants Ninja Turtles all of a sudden. And it's the hottest thing that anyone had ever seen. To the point where for years, the only thing the toy industry wanted to do was have their own Ninja Turtles. It wasn't enough. They didn't want to do their own thing anymore. To that point, 80s action figures were mostly like, here's an action figure, we've come up with our own aesthetic, and we've come up with some weird gimmick to put around it. There's a holographic image on the chest. They're chrome with flip-out wings. They have a bunch of ports on their armor you can plug different weapons and wings and things onto. Everyone was basically just trying to come up with different gimmicks for action figures. So when Ninja Turtles come around and the whole thing to them is it's just a weird aesthetic backed by a really good cartoon, now like everyone just wanted to ditch all their original ideas and come up with their own Ninja Turtles. That's where you run a string of things like Biker Mice from Mars, Toxic Crusaders, Street Sharks, Wild West Cowboys of Moo Mesa, all the way down to like the C-list tiers of like Barnyard Commandos. Everyone just wanted anthropomorphic animals that were kind of gross in design and just like super exaggerated. So that was basically toys in the late 80s and early 90s. It would be 5 years before anything else broke through that, and that was Power Rangers. You know, the next big juggernaut that was unstoppable. And ironically, an entire franchise built around making things as cheap as possible. You know, let's make a TV show where we only have to film half the footage, and a toy line where we don't have to develop the toys, we just have to borrow the molds out of Japan. That was, ironically, the show that technically had the least amount of effort to it is the one that overtook the Mighty Ninja Turtles at long last. So, yeah, in the meantime, we wheel it back. Transformers struggling at this point. This is the point where we basically just dive into just the small stuff that is really not doing anything original anymore. Again, we're back to this whole, like, we don't want to do anything original. We're trying to do what we think is safe. So instead of coming up with new gimmicks and all this, Transformers reverted. It became Micromasters to capitalize on the micro machine craze in the micro toy sector, and then Action Masters to try and do what G.I. Joe was doing, because G.I. Joe was still doing okay at this time. So they didn't really try to do the Transformer thing anymore. And you know, with no fiction backing it all up, it was just done. You know, Micromasters didn't even play into the comic books. So like, here's the bulk of all your toy lines, and there's very little behind it. There's, you know, Micromasters were not exactly like prominent characters in the books. So it was rough. It was a very rough period. And this culminates in 1990 where, yeah, Transformers was just dead. You know, for lack of better terms, and, you know, just to calm it down, just to kind of make it blunt about it, in 1990, the Transformers franchise in America completely died. Toys stopped coming out. Nothing new is being developed. And the only reason we can say that Transformers has always been around for the last 39 going on 40 years is because Europe and Japan still produced and put out some brand new stuff. But as far as Transformers in America go, it was done. You know, the toy line had lived out its purpose, and it was just put to the side and marked as, well, we had a good run. Now, that's kind of a shocking thing. It's kind of a sad thing. But at the same time, good things come of it. You know, it's an old adage. But it's a very true adage. The greatest teacher is failure. So at some point, in order to grow and evolve, Transformers has to fail. And you know what backed that up? The fact that the next time we saw Transformers, it was Generation 2, which suffered its entire run of middling sales and, again, doing literally nothing new. Hey, how are we going to come back from all this Ninja Turtle craze and try to break back into this sector with transforming robots again? Oh, I know. We'll do the exact same thing. No. Didn't go. Didn't work. Again, life support. Barely kept us around. But again, Hasbro had to go through this period of failure with the franchise in order to get to a point of desperation. Desperation breeds ingenuity. You have to get to that point so you can actually have this renaissance and actually figure out what does work. So, of course, that is when they handed over Kenner and we got Beast Wars. And from then on, Transformers was back in the business. Since Beast Wars, we've, I guess technically since Generation 2, because we did struggle through 1995 a little bit before we actually made it to 96 in the Promised Land. Ever since this, Transformers has been a mainstay of the toy aisle, and it hasn't gone anywhere, and I don't think it's going anywhere for a long time. So they learn that reinvention works, right? So they finally get this in their head that they can just redo this entire franchise from the ground up, and it will still be popular, it'll still be viable, and they can market it again. Great. Then they have to fail again, though, right? They have to fail again. So we've talked Beast Machines. We know what happened with Beast Machines. Went over so badly that it killed the third act of the Beast Wars saga, which would have been Transtech. So we accept this. This was a failure again. However, it's a failure that taught Hasbro probably the best lesson that they have ever learned. Have you ever noticed that Transformer toy lines and cartoons, have you noticed they run in 3-year cycles? It's easy to overlook because we got so much Transformers bombarding us at all times, but the truth is, Transformers runs for about 3-year periods. So, for instance, Transformers Animated was a 3-season show. The Unicron trilogy had a 3-year run. Transformers Prime, 3-season show. Cyberverse, 3-season show. Robots in Disguise 2015, 3-season show. Hasbro's gotten extremely comfortable with the idea of Transformer toy lines and cartoons lasting for about 3 years and then moving on to the next iteration of what Transformers is going to be. We know this in the collector's area, where we have things like Prime Wars Trilogy and the War for Cybertron Trilogy. So we're used to this in the collector's market as well, and we've kind of been in a 3-year cycle on a lot of things as well. The only exception to date are things like Rescue Bots for real little kids and Studio Series for generally for older collectors who like the Bayverse stuff. So for the most part, though, 3-year cycle, right? So with that, in all of that, where do you think that lesson comes from? It comes from Beast Wars, and it comes from the failure of Beast Machines. It teaches Hasbro, this is how long we can get away with doing the exact same thing, and then we're going to completely change up what's going on. And that has done something for the franchise that I think is really unique and I think goes overlooked a lot. So, the consequence, what happens when, you can't have, when you don't have failure of any kind, you end up in things like the Marvel trap, or you end up in like the DC trap, where either you are continuing the same story forever and you have this like impossible task of like jumping in. If you try to jump into Marvel right now with Peter Parker's life a mess, the X-Men losing an entire nation, and it's chaotic. It's absolutely chaotic. Because comic books have to do that. They have to constantly put themselves in chaos to keep the long-running fans interested, but it leaves you without a jumping-on point. Whereas in DC, you have the opposite problem, where they reboot the franchise so many times that there's too many jumping-on points, and you don't know what's valid anymore and what's canonical and what's not. But that's because everyone in comic books and these long-running stories are obsessed with keeping the same story going. And this is where the failure in 1990 and the failure again in 1999 teaches Hasbro something that a lot of media franchises just never understand. You see it now with Star Wars, where Star Wars is kind of middling. It used to be like the big be-all end-all of sci-fi fandom, and now the last few years, it's just like the interest is tanked. You know, it doesn't have that speciality to it anymore. It's not like unique. It's not interesting anymore. It's just oversaturated because it's long in the tooth is what it is. It just keeps going and going and going. Transformers is extremely unique as a media franchise because it doesn't obsess over keeping the same narrative going forever. It has become comfortable with rebooting and re-energizing itself, reinventing itself every 3 years. So it never stagnates. You know, you have kids for about a 3-year generation, you know, and then they move on to generations and studio series, or they just move on to other things in general in life. And, you know, that happens. But right around the corner, you have something brand new that younger kids can jump into, and then now they can grow up a little bit with the franchise too. And it works. It's why Transformers has such legacy today, because they're not falling into the trap of it all has to be the same story. They are comfortable with, we have a ton of universes, and we just have that. And you don't have to worry about, you know, like the continuity of G1. You don't have to worry about starting with More Than Meets the Eye Part 1 if you want to understand what's happening at the season finale of Earthspark, you know? And that's all because the franchise failed. The franchise failed more than once and had to pack everything up. And because of that, it survived. The failure is what let Transformers thrive as not only a toy line, but also a media franchise. And it's what puts it into rarefied air. We can, thankfully, thanks to Europe and Japan, say that Transformers has never left the toy aisles in 40 years. You don't know how huge that is? You know, for that, you have to get into things like Barbie. You have to get into Lego. You have to get into Hot Wheels. You have to get into these legacy toy lines that have never gone anywhere. You know, these just like titans of that. And this is kind of huge. That a little line that just started as, let's bring some toys over from Japan, actually managed to make that all work. So to summarize, this is basically just something that has been boiling in my head lately, just as we were getting ready to celebrate the 40th anniversary, just realizing how unique Transformers is as a franchise. Now, obviously, it's not the only franchise that works and operates like this, but it's very hard to find any other franchise like it that has narratives and stories and fictions that are ongoing, and it doesn't really worry about keeping to its own continuity. It doesn't worry about keeping the original stories intact. It just decides and picks something new to do and just does it. You know, and we're all just kind of cool with that. It's not like DC where half of the audience like starts rioting because they rebooted the universe again and there's a huge backlash over it. You never saw a huge backlash because they decided that Cyberverse had run its course and it's because we're kind of used to it. And because, you know, we've kind of been going through this since 1996. So, yeah, it's weird. It's weird to realize that the success in Transformers and what makes it unique is all because it failed. Because failure is the greatest of teachers. So, this is just, I don't know, just stream of thought that has been going through my head lately. So thank you for letting me vent it, if anything. And thank you for watching if you went this far through all of my weird ramblings. I do appreciate it. Let's look forward to hopefully another 40 years of this franchise and maybe 40 more years of me doing shout outs because you people are relentless. We will find out. But until then.
I'm like, I think you guys got this. I will back away, and I will see you all later.
You've got this handled.
Alafi's like, really? You're not gonna help me? Like, it's fine now.
It's like these disgusting creatures breathing down my neck, and you're all just like, I believe in you. You got this.
All right, you seem to have this. 5 minutes.